Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Her Hollywood Unscripted, where I share stories of women who have forged through Hollywood and broken the metaphorical glass ceiling. Their stories are here to inspire other young women about the do's and don'ts of femininity's intersection with Hollywood. So I'm really excited about today's guest because while we've heard from the production side of things, Dawn spent her entertainment days in a writer's room, which offers an entirely new perspective. And additionally, she helped write on a show we all know and love, Lost. So Dawn, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to hear your perspectives and experiences in the entertainment industry.
Hi, Emma. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for asking me to do this.
Of course. So let's jump right into it and give our listeners some background on who you are and how you got into the industry. So, did you always know you wanted to go into entertainment?
Yes, for sure. Since I was probably in fifth or sixth grade, I think,
Oh,
uh,
wow.
I was fascinated with television. I was addicted to television, and I wanted to know how it was made, like what went on behind the scenes. I was just fascinated by that whole process. So most people don't know what they want to do, especially that early on in life.
Yeah. Were you ever exposed to that through your parents, family members? Did you ever know anyone growing up that worked in television?
No, not at all. Not at all. It was so foreign and it was so like, far away and you have to go to LA to do that. And, it was a whole thing.
And so, what was your first job? How did you get into entertainment?
I went to Emerson College in Boston, which is a film and television school. So I majored in it to begin with. And they had a program in Los Angeles in the early 90s. I believe it's still going on, the program where you could come out here an internship at a company and for a semester. So I started doing that. And
Wow.
I landed an internship with Jodie Foster, which was like a windfall. It was amazing. She became a mentor to me, which, you couldn't ask for a better mentor. And so I interned with her and then went back and finished college. And when I moved out here, I actually started working for her for a little while. And then, yeah, her company eventually stopped making movies. And then they were under an umbrella with propaganda um, films, and then I started working for them. And
Wow. That's awesome that your internship was able to turn into your first job. Do you think,
yeah, yeah. The internship was unpaid, and then I went back and finished the last semester of school, and then I came out here, and I was like, "What do I do?" So I just called them up and said, "Can I come work there now?" And fortunately, the same people were there, and they invited me back. So
and if you hadn't had that internship, what do you think it looks like for young women trying to get their foot in the door? Do you think it's all based on connections? How do you think that all
I
works?
think it's all based on connections, 100%. I mean, for a while I toyed with going to grad school, and I'm so glad I didn't and waste that money because this industry is all about who you know and making those connections. So I'm glad I just came out and started working right away. And I highly recommend an internship process just to get to know people.
I mean, sometimes that's what it takes, just making the call.
Exactly. Just being bold and making those calls. And like, later on, I'm sure we'll talk more about writing, but I was giving my script to anybody who would read it. It's
Yeah.
just you have to have very little shame and be bold and go for it. Yeah.
No, I think that's awesome advice. And do you think it looks any different for a male getting into the industry versus a female? When you were doing it, were you ever steered in one direction versus another?
Can't really pinpoint what that was, but you would notice like all the assistants, right? Getting in this industry, you usually start as an assistant, no matter what you're doing, whether you're writing or you're in production, you start as an assistant and you're getting bagels and coffee for people and just meeting people, right? And
Mhm.
I'd say, 90% of the assistants when I came up were women. And it was just like that was the foot in the door, and it was women. And the guys would, get a better position somehow. They'd be working at an agency and, doing different things. And I can't really pinpoint what that was, but it was definitely the culture.
That's really interesting. And do you think that writers' rooms in general are typically male dominated or female dominated?
100% male dominated. 100%. We would typically have like 12 people on staff, right? For a television show, that's around the ballpark number of writers you have because you have to produce 22 episodes a season, right? That was for network television at the time. So you'd have a staff of 12, and I'd say 10 were men, one was a woman, and one was a diversity hire, without a doubt. That's what it looked like. So yeah, it was daunting for sure.
Oh, absolutely. And Can you share specific stories of if you were immediately made aware of being a woman in a room full of men, how did that play out when you were the only girl in writers' rooms? I'd love to hear stories.
I have so many stories. I mean, well, first, just going back to sort of what I said, this sort of quota, um, mentality where they're like, okay, well, we have to have a woman in there. I felt that immediately. My agent would call me and say, you know what, they've already got a woman in their room. You didn't get the job, just stuff like that.
Wow.
Um, and then, later, once I got my foot in the door and got in a writer's room, just the atmosphere is just so male. It's the jokes and the behavior is very male skewed.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
interesting that you mentioned the jokes because my mom, when I interviewed her, she was talking about how there was just constantly like conversation that she wouldn't understand. And in my research, we talked about how like the glass ceiling is like very subtle, but it's kind of it is able to be upheld because there's really subtle remarks and unconscious bias that's just present in entertainment. And I think sometimes it can manifest in the form of just like jokes you're not a part of. Like, how does that others you in that environment, you know?
100%. Yeah. It's definitely, sometimes borders on inappropriate stuff too, especially back when I was in the business, there wasn't a lot of protection or safeguards against that, and if you didn't fit in and you weren't one of the boys, they kind of didn't want you in the room.
And were there ever moments in your career where you felt like being a woman held you back or served as like a barrier to your success?
Yes, I lost jobs out, because they only wanted one woman in the room or, had men in mind. So, um, I probably can count 5 or 6 jobs off the top of my head for writer staff, staffing jobs that I've lost because they already had a woman or they didn't want more women in the room. So yeah, directly influenced by that. Yeah.
That's so surprising, especially for a field in writing. I feel like it would be so important to have like a diverse
Diversity.
array of perspectives because then the movies you make and or TV shows, then they connect with more people. So
100%, you would think that would be the mentality, right? The same thing with age. Like I'm feeling this now, right? As my daughter's getting ready to leave for school, I'm like, well, I have more time. Maybe I'll go back to writing, but I feel like nobody wants to hire a woman in their 50s, They want young,
yeah.
fresh voices. So I feel like you get that with not only a male female, but you also get it with a little bit of ageism and you would think they want this diverse staff and all these different voices and perspectives, but it just doesn't pan out that way.
And do you think the same with the ageism component you mentioned, do you think the same would go for men? Do you think they would value an older man's life experiences in a writer's room, or do you think it's pretty much the same across the board?
Based on my experience, I would say no, they'd probably hire the older man over an older female, just based on what I came up through. But because we had quite a few, the age range for men was pretty broad in the rooms I was in.
When you were in it, how did you notice shifts in women's voices and representation? Like, did you notice that there was improvement throughout your time in entertainment? Do you see this in writing and movies that you recently watched?
Think that, there was the Me Too movement, that I went through. I shouldn't say everyone, that my coworkers went through. And I think that shifted the landscape a little bit. People were behaving differently in the writer's room. And I think that opened the door for more women. And I also think that the fact that more people have access to doing this stuff now, right? There's editing software you can have at home, you can write at home. There's so many more platforms, right? When I was doing this, it was like network TV. You had the big three, and maybe a cable, station. And now anyone can go and write and make content, right? It's so accessible. So it's opened it up to everyone. So women don't have to go in the same route that we used to have to go. So I do think there's more opportunity in that sense.
That's awesome. Progress is progress, but the Me Too
Right.
movement, I do want to talk about that a little bit because I also studied that in my research, and I want to know was it an overnight shift in the industry when the like Harvey Weinstein article broke in the New York Times? What was that? What was the atmosphere like?
No, I don't think it was overnight. I think, at first there was fear. And people were probably operating out of fear and, the networks and people in charge are like, okay, we have to be very careful now because otherwise we're going to have lawsuits and, and all this stuff is going to happen. So people were doing things out of fear. I think the shift, was very gradual to where people were hiring more diverse people and women and
Yeah.
yeah.
And I know you talked about how you got along with the guys you worked with, but can you describe
Mhm.
any specific relationships with other men in the industry, whether them that be positive, negative? What did that look like for you?
Was very few. There were few mentors that I had that were male. I worked my first job that I told you about at Propaganda after the internship with Jody was for a man named Steve Golan, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago. And he ran Propaganda and he was an angel, the guy. I was so lucky because he was just so open to having women. He had, all his assistants were obviously women, and he had his development person was a woman who was reading scripts for him. And he
Wow.
he was just like the perfect boss. And it makes me sad to talk about that he's gone, but and he made great films. And then I had the flip side of that. I left Steve to go work for a director that worked under Propaganda. We had a stable of like probably 20 directors at the time. And had, then it was like a rude awakening because he was the complete opposite. He was a misogynist and he was not a nice person. And, and actually I think he got in trouble a couple times for sexual harassment, and I won't name names, but so I had, I started out so strong. Came out of Jody and I had Steve, who's a real champion for women, and then went to the complete opposite environment. So I've experienced both.
You know what? Thank goodness that your first boss was so awesome because
Yes.
I feel like that would have been an immediate deterrent from the industry
A
if
hundred
you
percent.
had
I
the.
might have packed up and went back to New York, like I had the best case scenario.
Absolutely, that's all you can hope for. I do want to talk about motherhood because I think that's a plays a huge factor in like women in many industries, but especially entertainment. So, can you talk to me about the timeline of when you quit your job, when you had your daughter Sandy, and what factors played into making that decision?
That whole story changed my life. Like 100% changed my life. So I was on Lost when I got pregnant, and I was afraid to tell the showrunner, honestly, and I kept it to myself for quite a while, as long as I could, because I just had a gut feeling that I wasn't going to be asked for the next season, saying that I was pregnant and probably going to have to take maternity leave. Um, so I kept it to myself as long as I could, but eventually had to tell him, and left the show. And about, I guess it was 6 months later. I don't remember what the time gap was in between, but I eventually got a call for a show called Cold Case, and ended up Sandy was an infant at the time. By then she was born, and then ended up going back to work for a little while on that. And that was so difficult. It was so difficult to try to juggle, being on staff and working those long hours and then coming home and being a mom. We had to hire a nanny because none of the daycares were open long enough. You work crazy hours in a writer's room. You're there, 8 in the morning till sometimes 8, 9 at night. So we had to hire a nanny to come and take care of her. And it just broke my heart. Like, she was going to bed before I got home. And then in the morning, I left before she woke up. So I only saw her on the weekends.
Yeah, that's like
Mhm.
verbatim what my mom said.
Yeah. And
It's so
I
hard with
knew
those long hours.
it was long. And, she was our only and is our only child. So I was like, look, if I'm going to do this once, I want to do it right. So fate stepped in, and I was on Cold Case working, and we went on strike. And it was the first writer's strike back in 2007. And it was over Netflix. That strike was the main, right? Netflix was coming out, and it was like, how do writers get residuals on this content? And that
Mhm.
was the main point of that strike, I believe. And so I was home with her for the entire duration of the strike. And I was like, I can't go back. Like, I don't want to leave this. Like, I enjoyed it so much being home with her and being part of her life. And I actually went back after the strike and finished the show out, and that was it. I never turned back. I don't regret it at all. I miss it. I miss the creative part of it, but I wouldn't give it up for anything, the time that I've had with her. I guess to go back to your question, the factors in quitting, were just that, the time commitment, the time that you have to be there. And, you know, I was commuting to Burbank to do it. So that was an extra 2 hours on my day. It's just really, really difficult to do both.
Do you think that's why a lot of women end up leaving the industry? Well, like, why do you think some are able to leave and some are able to stay? Is it a matter of priorities and sacrifice?
I think it's also financial and, the resources that you have and the place that you're at in your career. I was new. I was still like a baby writer, they called us. And, that man, you were the last one out of that room. You stayed, you take the notes off the board. You didn't ever want to be the first one to leave. You wanted to be there last. And so I think if you had, the money or the resources to continue to hire that nanny or have someone help you care for them, or you're higher up on the ladder, if you're an executive producer on the show, where you can say, okay, I'm leaving today at 6, or, my child has a doctor's appointment, I got to get out of here. You can do those things. You have that flexibility. But coming up, you can't do that. You can't. The job's so competitive that they're just like, if you can't be here, we'll get the next person, Yeah.
And you talk about being a baby writer. At what point are you considered like a senior level writer? Like you're pretty stable?
Once you get to the producer level, if you watch the credits of a TV show, you'll see staff writers, and then you'll see producers, and then exec producers, and then you become a showrunner. I think once you hit the producer level, you have a little more breathing room. But those first couple shows or those first few years, you have to dedicate 110% to it.
How
Yeah.
important was your relationship to other women to your success? And how did you view female friendships in the industry?
Um, well, they were few and far in between simply because of numbers, right? There weren't that many women on the staff.
Yeah.
So, you're lucky to find a mentor or someone to be there and bounce things off of. I had that with a woman named Jen Johnson. She was on Lost for a couple seasons, and then she was also on Cold Case, and she put my name in at Cold Case to come in and interview. So that was a big help. And I will say Cold Case was a completely different animal because that was a female run show, which I'd never seen before, right?
Yeah.
Vina Sud was the showrunner, and it was mom friendly, that show. I never experienced anything like this or seen it since that I know of. But, she would make concessions. There's things I talked about. She would be like, okay, we're done. It's 6 o'clock. We're leaving. People have to get home to their families. People have to get dinner on the table. Like, it was just a completely different environment and so foreign to me. So I did have a few women, but for the most part, it's cutthroat and competitive.
Because there were so few women, did you ever feel like you were in competition with other women and that other women weren't super friendly to you because you guys were going for the same job?
You're in competition with everyone. Yes. Not just the women. You're in there. You want your idea to be the best idea. You want your idea up on that board. You're in competition with everyone. I don't know if that's necessarily male, female, but certainly just as a numbers game, yeah. When there are only a couple women, yeah, it becomes that, right? You don't want it to become that, but it does. And I don't think it's until you get to a certain level of power that you can really be like, okay, I'm gonna give a hand to the next female on the staff, or help them out and become that mentor.
Right, because you're just fighting for yourself at that
You're
point.
fighting for yourself until you get up to that exec producer level, I think.
And you talked about those organizations that tried to help women. Do you want to expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, when I came up, there was one called Women in Film, which actually Jodie Foster, going back, she was a big part. That's how I got involved with that. And it was just, a group of women who worked in the industry who would do this kind of stuff and lend that hand and try to help you find jobs. And, they would hold different meetings and seminars, just to discuss this kind of thing and try to figure out ways to, get around it and get above it and get more women in the rooms. I think film is probably even harder than television. At least in television, you have a staff, so you have a shot. When you're writing a movie, it's usually one person, right? And you're writing in this bubble,
Right.
And I I think for that, you're probably better off writing under a pseudonym. Say, I
So,
would be D. Kelly. No one would know if I was male or female.
like J.K. Rowling, same
Yes,
idea.
right, right, exactly.
Wow. And do you think like the women in film, was that advertised often? Do you think women knew about that as
Just within the industry, yeah, I think people knew about it, and I know that there are more now. Again, I'm a little antiquated and dated at this point, but I know there are other different organizations that do that and try, and the studios try too. I can't knock them totally. They have the DEI programs, they have, it in place where they encourage you to hire women. I just, I still feel like you don't see it as much.
well, I think that's good for young women to hear too, that there are resources once you're in the business
Yes.
to help you get your career kickstarted. So I do want to read a Sydney Sweeney quote to you because I thought it was really interesting just to get your take on it. It says, "This entire industry, all people say is women empowering other women. None of it's happening. All of it's fake and a front for other stuff that they say behind everyone's back." So, do you think that the industry gets presented as being more DEI friendly and around women representation, and it's actually presented to be something it's not?
Oh, I think that quote is probably pretty true, at least when I was going through it. I think that I hate to say it, but I do. I think they put up a pretty good front, that they are DEI friendly and empowering. But when it gets down to, the trenches, it's every person for themselves, every woman for themselves.
And what do you think needs to change for more women to be represented behind the scenes in storytelling and production roles?
Like I said, I do think I think it's changing. I think just by nature of the landscape being so much bigger and the opportunity, it was so narrow when I was younger and writing, and now again, anyone can go in and produce, a short film or, so I think just by virtue of that, you'll see this change happening. I know when I watch credits now, I see a lot more female names up there. So I think we just have to keep plugging away and keep taking every opportunity to, whether it's, something small, it doesn't have to be for a major company or, just keep plugging away at it.
And I think that's probably good advice too for young girls is your first job. It might not be the big studio. You might not be working for Warner Brothers your first gig, but you know, take anything and meet people and learn from that and then, eventually climb the ladder.
100%. I had someone once told me that, if you're a writer, you should be writing all the time. It doesn't matter, if you're getting paid for it. It doesn't matter who you're writing for. You should just be writing and letting ideas and creativity flow as much as you can. And like I said, what I did, just give your scripts to anybody who will read them.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I do want to end on a happy note because I do hear like fondness from the industry and amazing stories from you. So for fun, what were some of the most rewarding moments in your career or some of your fondest memories?
And the highlight has to be winning the Writers Guild Award for Lost. That was a pretty big deal, and getting to go to the award ceremony. I have a good story for that too. Sandy was little. Again, she was probably a year old, right? That was the second season of Lost, and so I was still breastfeeding because she was still an infant, and I was like, I can't leave her, and be gone for this 6 hours, right? That's a whole nother story, bringing the pump to work, but that's probably TMI for you. But so we had my sister-in-law in the car with us, and got all dressed up and drove to the awards ceremony, and she was downstairs in the hotel, and we were in the ballroom, right? Had the award show, and I would sneak out and go check on her. And at one point, I would sneak out and was breastfeeding her, and then we'd go back into the award ceremony, and we won a Writers Guild Award that night. It was pretty crazy.
That sounds literally surreal.
Yeah, it was surreal. Like, and just trying to that is just the right perfect representation of trying to juggle two things at once, literally.
That's awesome, Dawn.
Thank you. Yeah. And then, just the day-to-day of it, I do have fond memories. I mean, I touched upon a lot of the negative, but being in a room is fun. Just the creative nature of it, and just bouncing ideas off other people. I much prefer writing television than film. just because of the collaborative nature of it, and if you're lucky enough, you get in a room with some good guys and people who, respect your voice and can be free flowing with that creativity.
What advice would you give to other women trying to break into writing and entertainment?
Just to keep writing for anything and anyone that you can. The smallest job can be turned into the biggest job. You can write anywhere, right? You can write when you're broke, when you're making money, when you're employed, unemployed, at home, in an office. Just keep writing. That's my advice.
That's awesome. And I hope you keep writing. I hope to hear that when Sandy goes off to college, that you're now relaunching your entertainment career.
That's in the back of my head. I'm really thinking of getting back into it now. I'll have a lot of time on my hands.
That's awesome. Well, Dawn, I appreciate your perspectives and your insight so much. I think that you had so many good pieces of advice, and I think just from you sharing your experiences, people have a lot to learn from it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you.